I am feeling fantastic. And this is for a number of reasons. But one of the main reasons is because on Sunday night, my team, the Washington Commanders, we have been fighting all season to get back in there. And now we tied with the New York Giants last Sunday. They lost yesterday to Philly, and we play them again Sunday night. Sunday night football. We play them. I'm excited. I'll be there. It's my son's first NFL game, and it's his birthday that day. So it'll be fun to take my son there. So I'm looking forward to it. All right. Many of you have been watching the media, right? If you have a social media, Twitter or YouTube in particular, you are aware of Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and since then has become somewhat of a tyrant to certain people, depending on how you view Twitter and what he's doing. All right. So Elon Musk has been releasing what people are calling the Twitter files, right? This sense of let me release these emails and documents, these back and forth conversations between Twitter elite, Twitter employees who were talking about whether or not they should restrict the getting requests by the Biden campaign at the time, meeting with FBI and different people to hide tweets and things like that. So he's released a couple of different sets of these things. And so depending on where you're at politically, you're going to react to these releases two different ways. So if you're on the right, because it was exposing the Biden campaign, not wanting to release pictures of Hunter Biden and things like that in pornographic mode, you will see this as a bombshell, right? Like if you watch Fox News in particular, you will watch them highlight that this is the bombshell of Elon Musk to drop all this free speech restriction and so forth. If you're on the left, you won't see this as that big of a deal. Like, what's the big deal? There's not a real smoking gun here. And part of their argument is the right is saying, well, he's restricting the government. The government's restricting free speech. But at the time of this happening, Joe Biden wasn't the president yet. Trump was still president. So technically he ran the government. It was just Joe Biden's campaign. But all that to say, if you look at the news, you will see, Elon Musk has released another Twitter. And then there's other people releasing these particular Twitter stories where, depending on who you are, people are accusing Twitter of not allowing free speech. So free speech has been a hallmark of America. It's the First Amendment in the Constitution. We're going to look at that in just a second. It's been a hallmark of America, and it's what people are saying is at stake right now. And then right now it's about Twitter, but let's be honest, free speech has been under attack. Whatever they call free speech has been under attack for a long time. So we're going to look at this, and I want to answer this question. Should believers care about free speech in the way that the government has described it? Should believers care about free speech in the way that the government has described it? The reason why I'm asking this question is because there are a lot of people, particularly more on the right, who would call themselves constitutionalists that would say you're obstructing the Constitution by Twitter not shadow banning, right? If you know what shadow banning is when a company intentionally does not allow your tweet, or if it's a YouTube video, your video, or if it's Instagram, your picture or your reel, they intentionally do not allow it to reach exposure, and they don't tell you why. So you put out a video, you put out a tweet, and everyone thinks, you think it's going everywhere and no one's seeing it, and you don't even know. And so there's this thing called shadow banning, right? Which companies do this. So a lot of what's happening now is more shadow banning is being exposed, and the logic behind it is coming out behind these companies. And the question is this a judgment against free speech? And so my question is, should believers care about free speech in the way that the government has described it? Having said that, I want to start with a verse. I realized that I need to make sure people understand why I do what I do. So you're going to see this verse whenever you watch videos from me, because I tend to say things and critique all sides. So this is the verse that governs how I think about everything. My hermeneutic of the world, in a sense, and the way I say things is really about this verse. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but indeed expose them, right? Instead, expose them. So I don't have an axe to grind. I'm not on this political side or that side or with this people group or this tribal group. I just call out what I see, and I've been doing this since before there were cell phones. So Ephesians 5:11 is what I'm saying. It's what I call stay balanced. It's the ability to critique everyone, not necessarily give 50% critique here. I'm not talking about balance in that sense. I'm balancing that I'll say things about what I see, and I think there's darkness on all sides, including even in my own life. I got to expose that, right? All right, having said that, should believers care about free speech? So let's talk about what free speech is, first of all, according to the First Amendment, all right? So let me read to you just briefly. This is the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and here's what it says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's an interesting statement. That in the First Amendment, the last part of that amendment, it says that Congress shall make no law respecting or prohibiting a petition for the government for a redress of grievances. That's not what this video is about, but I think that's an interesting statement in light of a lot of the pushback against like reparations per se and stuff like that. It says that you're allowed to petition the government for a redress of what? Of grievances. But that's not what we're talking about right now. All right. So in this article, and if you look at this in the law, there's a ton of different categories that describe what this means. It talks about what slander, defamation, libel, government speech, government or commercial speech, obscenity, like it has defamation, it has all these things, right? And they call this First Amendment. So essentially the First Amendment right is I'm allowed to say what I want. I have freedom of speech to say what I want. All right. But there are consequences for certain things. So if there's slander, libel, or defamation, I could be sued, right? I could be sued for that. If there's commercial speech, I have certain obligations under a guideline of speech, right? If I have government, there's certain obligations. Obscenities, there's certain obligations. But essentially, I have the right to say what I want and should not be hindered by the government. Okay, that's important to know that. The government, it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press. So freedom of the press. The press can print what they think is news. Congress can't stop that. The key point of that is Congress, right? So this is a document defining how the government will interact with the rest of us, right? The people that it governs, and it's saying that the government will not impose any laws prohibiting free speech. All right. So that's essentially what free speech is. Free speech is the ability to say things without having restrictions placed on me by the government, unless these things fall under the category of libel, defamation, or slander, or things that I can be sued for. That can happen. I can still say it, but I can be sued for it. All right. So in a general sense, I'm not going to get into the, break down all of it, but in a general sense, that's what free speech is. So here's the question then. This document was written a couple hundred years ago, and this document doesn't necessarily govern private organizations, private industries, right? There have been many lawsuits that have tried to, but this is private industries, right? So Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of these platforms are private companies. They're not government entities. So the government may use these entities, but let's be clear, they're not governmental entities. The government may have a Twitter account. It may have all these things, but in reality, these are private companies, right? So here's the problem. When a private company, whenever you or I get a new app, and we sign up for a new company, there's usually something called terms of agreement, right? Terms of agreement. Many of us, we just zip past that to the end and press I agree. Because one, that stuff is so written, it's written in such a way that they know nobody's going to read that stuff. Let's keep it a thou wow. Have you ever read the terms of agreement on anything you've bought? If you do, you're a weirdo. Most people will just scroll, or if you bought something new, you put, I don't even read instruction manuals unless I'm really struggling, right? No one reads the terms of agreement, but those terms of agreement are important because they say what the company is allowed to do. And when you click I agree on that box, you're agreeing to submit to whatever that is, whether you read it or not. All right. So every organization pretty much has a term of agreement. So Twitter has one, everyone has one. All right. So here's the question. If Twitter is blocking free speech, first of all, they're not a governmental entity. Are they blocking things based on their terms of use or their terms of agreement? They have a right to say, I don't like what you tweeted. It goes against our policy. People get offended at that because many of us don't read the policy. I don't read them. It goes against the policy, well, all that. But it's a private organization, right? So when we're saying Elon Musk is releasing this and people are like, man, this is against free speech. Is it against free speech according to the Constitution? I have to be honest. I'm having a hard time seeing, even if I don't like the point, I'm having a hard time seeing how Twitter is blocking my free speech if it shadow bans my tweet or erases it or doesn't let it get down. It's a private company, even if it's used as public consumption. It's still in a capitalistic country. This is what you sign up for. We are not a socialist or a communist country. We're a capitalist country, which means privatization, right? Privatization is key. I own this company. I determine its rules as long as it doesn't break the law of the land. It's not breaking the law of the land for you to kick me off of your platform or for you to. So that's the problem that we're having. Free speech is seemingly under attack. Now, let's just be clear. We're talking about this in Twitter, but free speech has been under attack for a lot. The whole pronoun wars is an infringement on free speech. Trying to force people to make you use pronouns that make them feel a certain way is an attack on free speech, right? Trying to make anyone say that they disagree with distinctions of like male and female, gender, all these things. That's an infringement upon free speech, right? Going back and looking at what people said 10 years ago and then canceling them and not allowing them as if people haven't grown and changed. All of these things are infringements of free speech. So Twitter is just a new sort of thing that politicians are wrapping their minds around so that they can kind of say, you're trying to go after free speech because as Americans, we're triggered by things like free speech because we're entitled to free speech, right? That's how we think as Americans. So when politicians highlight that, listen, free speech is being under attack, you and I are triggered. Most of us may be triggered by that. So free speech is an idea that we in this country are allowed to say what we want, even if it hurts people, right? It can hurt people. You can call people out, say mean things about people in public platforms, and it is what it is. Now, if you lied or slandered or defended, then someone could sue you and that's the consequences. But in a sense, that's what free speech is. But my original question is, should believers care about free speech in the way that the government has designed it? And I would say to answer that question, we have to ask another question. What is free speech biblically? This is where the rubber meets the road, because many believers in America, at least, who profess to be Christians, you've heard me say this if you're a follower of Cross-Examine, theological, right? Theological, not theological. Many Christians are more concerned about constitutional morality. And by that, what I mean is obeying the morality of the Constitution more than, at times, obeying the morality of the Scriptures, right? That's, in essence, it's my worldview is more political, but I'm a believer, so it's theological, than it is theological, right? Where my view is basically, what does God say and what does God want, right? There's a sense where many of us are drawn to and inflamed by a sort of protection of a document that governs our society way more than we're inflamed by or affected by the biblical documents that governs our morality. So we live in a culture where Christians will defend free speech, but we don't think about, well, what is biblical free speech, right? What is biblical free speech? Do we have free speech in the way that the government assesses it? Well, if you're a genuine Christian, you have to say, well, not really. Not really. So here's one thing that we have to consider. Here's what Jesus says about our free speech. Here's one thing Jesus said in Matthew 12 about free speech, about speech in general. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. Listen to this. This is Jesus saying this. You can go look this up. They will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. This is Jesus saying. So here you go with your free speech. You can say whatever you want, okay? But you're going to give an account for every careless word, okay? He's not just talking about what you say. He's talking about what you tweet, what you put on your Facebook feed. All these things that come out, we're going to be judged by every careless word, right? You have passages like James chapter 3 that tell you to tame the tongue, right? The tongue is the smallest body part, but it causes the world of fire ablaze, right? Most times when we're hurt or offended by people, it's because of things that they've said to us. The way they've said it, often. I mean, other things offend us, obviously, but those things matter, right? You get that. You get Ephesians 4, right? Listen to what Ephesians 4 says about our speech. Listen to what it says. And this is one that gets me all the time because I'm kind of like, I like to joke around a lot like that, right? I could joke around, but it tells us that we have to be careful in the way that we talk to each other, even when we joke around. It tells us stuff like putting away falsehoods and things like that. It says, listen, verse 29, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up as it fits the occasion. Right? And then it says, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit. So you get this, let no corrupting talk, right? But it builds others up. So think about this when you think about how often you say things. I know I can critique people. I can say things mean-spirited. I can be harsh with my children or my wife. All of that's considered. It's saying, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth. But free speech, according to the government, allows you to do that. Free speech, according to the government, gives you license to do that. You're allowed to do that. You can say things that do not build others up. And this is what people are fighting for. This is what people are fighting for, calling out free speech. Now, in an organization, in a country where we're like a big organization is what America is, like a huge organization is what America is. And within that organization, there are microcosms of organizations. And these are people who own corporate businesses. They're allowed to define the terms and conditions on which they use their services. And some of these services do not, they have the right to take your stuff down if they want. Is that an infringement upon free speech according to the First Amendment? I don't see it. And I'm not that great in politics. I'm not that intelligent. I could be missing it, but I don't see it because they're not a government entity. Congress isn't passing laws. These are conversations happening with people in political positions of power. But that's different than making laws. That's no law telling Twitter they have to do this. Now, if in a capitalistic society, they make it seem like we're not going to support this or do that, they may blackmail you into doing something you don't want to do, but they're not passing a law. That's a different thing. The challenge is many believers are getting so caught up in free speech. That's something that we don't even have, biblically speaking. The Bible does not give us the ability to have free speech. It tells us we have to be careful because we're going to be judged by the words that we have, that we use. Which creates one more problem that I want to bring up. Here's the deeper concern. What's the deeper concern of all this happening? This is the problem with what we're seeing. We've always thought free speech and we have all these liberties. And to some degree, that's true. We can say things and not have the fear of, at least to some degree. We can say things and not have the fear of being attacked or whatever. But it's always been the case in this country. I mean, we can go back to the 20th century and look at the Red Scare and communism and McCarthyism. If you were accused, you know what's interesting? If you were accused of being a communist like 70 years ago, say you said something or someone just accused you, like this guy McCarthy, it was a senator, would accuse people of being a communist, it would ruin your livelihood because America was so afraid of and was such at war with Russia that you being a communist, we had these Red Scares, right? After the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 20th century, and then it was a violent revolution, then it became like this fear of communism. In fact, when migrants were coming to America, they would treat you based on what kind of country you were coming from. Are you coming from a communist country or a country that's sympathetic to communism? Then you were treated harshly. This is why like Russians and Germans and different people would come, and even though they had white skin, they were treated like almost like black because you coming from a communist nation. But then if you came from a nation that wasn't soft on communism or socialism, then you were welcome. Well, eventually the melting pot changed, but there was you could say something and then communist people would come after you. You'd lose your livelihood with no proof. This is why they call it McCarthyism, because this senator was accusing people of being communists, ruining people's lives, and he had no proof of it. Well, today, the same thing is happening. You could say something and people accuse you of being a Marxist or a socialist. And now that's the boogeyman today, the economic boogeyman, right? So this stuff has been happening for the longest time. Let's not act like, oh my gosh, what is Twitter doing? Like free speech has been, whatever we call free speech has been suppressed because we live in a country that has two words that I'm going to describe. This is a country, right now it's more profound, but we've always lived under what's called surveillance capitalism, all right? This is the reality. Surveillance capitalism is a fundamental reality. And we've known it more so in the realm of like how Facebook and Twitter and stuff have used their platforms to sort of steer people a certain way. So let me explain to you let me tell you what surveillance capitalism is. I'm going to read this definition. I'm going to talk about how it's used, and then you'll see what I mean. Surveillance capitalism is the monetization of data captured through monitoring people's movements and behaviors online and in the physical world. Consumer surveillance is most commonly used for targeting, marketing, and advertising, right? So here's another definition of how it's used. Surveillance capitalism is used for profit-making incentives that drive corporations to capture and commodify personal data. This phenomenon is distinct from government surveillance, though the two can reinforce each other, all right? So surveillance capitalism is essentially corporations watching what we go to, what we look at, what we like, what we say, and then they use advertising to target us. So it's the reason where you go look at something on Amazon and then 30 seconds later in your Facebook feed is the same item or something like that, right? It's that advertise. Well, the same thing is happening, right? If you want to control what people say, you want to be influenced with, you want to weigh in on what people say, this is another way of surveillance capitalism. This is what we're experiencing. Twitter is, so they have the right to say, we don't like what you say, we're going to block you, we're going to shadow ban you, we're going to erase your comments, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. And they may decide, hey, it's really what I would call it is surveillance capitalism favoritism, right? It's surveillance favoritism capitalism. This is what the real war is. The real war for free speech is not what you and I are allowed to say. The real war for free speech, this culture war that Elon Musk is the general of, is really about surveillance favoritism capitalism, where you will give favoritism towards certain political ends and certain political gains, and you will stop people from saying certain things on your platform in which you own. So Facebook has a right to give you content that they think will get you to stay on their platform. That's the whole point. So all of the algorithms and all those things, that's what we're really fighting. We're really fighting who's gets the most favoritism. The conservatives were really offended when they found out that Twitter was not allowing certain tweets about the Biden campaign, which was a big deal, to come out on Twitter. And some of it was just pornographic videos of his Biden's son having sex. That's against their policy, right? And this is how important it was. Trump recently said that we should overturn the Constitution because of stuff like this. And so now conservatives are moving away from Trump. So what am I saying? I'm saying all this to say, as believers, right, we're caught up. We have a different war. We're fighting a different free speech war. Now, if you, here's the free speech war for believers, the real free speech war. You telling me I'm not allowed to talk about Jesus or praise Jesus, right? I'm not talking about on your private platform. If you tell me you can't say Jesus here, okay, that could go against the Constitution. It could go against First Amendment rights. It could. But again, when you live in a country where we're basically a huge organization and privatization is king, ironically, all these people who hate socialism, most of them don't mind socialism when it comes to healthcare, and they subsidize some of that cost so you don't got to pay all that money for that surgery. But that's a different conversation. We're not talking about that right now. Stop making me say things that I don't want to say. But I will say this in closing. We live in a privatized capitalistic country, and what you see is what you get. You cannot blame these companies for not giving you favoritism in your speech. And free speech is not something that private organizations, they're allowed to set the terms and conditions of what they allow. I don't always like it. I found out recently, I do photography, and I'm Kurt Kennedy as a photographer on Instagram. And for a long time, I was getting little engagement on my photos. And it's like, dang, man. And then all of a sudden, boom, I started getting tons of engagement. It was like, man, all of a sudden now I'm getting a couple hundred likes for photos and stuff like that. I know what I'm doing with the camera. You know what I'm saying? I click them. I wasn't getting no likes. And then all of a sudden, I'm back to getting like 25, 30 likes. So it's like, okay, they're shadow banning me again. It could be because I'm using too many hashtags. I don't know. But this stuff happens. What am I going to do, though? Go to Instagram and be like, man, you guys they can do whatever they want. I clicked yes when I signed on the terms and conditions. So as a believer, we have terms and conditions too, and it's the Bible. So in Acts 4, when Peter and John are standing before the Sanhedrin, they say something different. And this is when we should fight free speech as believers. Here's what Peter and John and them say. It says, rulers of the people and elders, if we are being examined today concerning a good deed done to a crippled man, by what means this man has been healed, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead, by him, this man is standing before you well. This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone. And there is no salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven for which they would be saved. And then after they pushed back the religious leaders, here's what they said. When they said, what shall we do with these men? They were like, look, we have to worship man. We can't worship man. We have to worship God. So basically, we're not going to stop sharing about Jesus. So if you're going to beat us, you're going to beat us. When it comes to that kind of free speech, that's where believers should be at. I'm not going to not say I believe in Jesus, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to not say that. You can't tell me to do that. But guess what, though? If I'm working for a company, if I'm working for a private, that might be an issue. I might have to submit to the governing authorities on that. But that's a different conversation. In general, these free speech wars by General Elon Musk are really a facade. Now, if I wanted to go really, really deep, which I'm not going to in this video, if I wanted to get really deep, then we talk about the connection between God confusing the languages at Babel, right? And then Pentecost bringing all the languages back, and how significant words are and what words actually communicate, and why the enemy goes after words, and that Jesus being the word of God. I would get really deep with it, really spooky, but y'all don't want that smoke today. So we'll just keep it on constitutional instead of Christitutional, right? There's a whole nother layer of this. But in closing, these free speech wars are really a facade. They're really about surveillance, favoritism, capitalism is what it is. We're angry that you favor them over us. It's political gains. It's political means. There's no explosion here because none of these companies are governmental agencies or their Congress forcing laws to be passed to restrict you and our free speech. Let's just be clear. There's a difference between what the law says. So there's God's law, There's the law in which we live under, federal, state, and local. And then there's the law of public opinion, okay? A lot of what we react to is the law of public opinion. It's not God's law. It's not even federal, state, or local law. It's the law of public opinion, or what they call the court of public opinion. We react much to what they say, and we treat it as, because people feel this way, that it's impending, infringing God's law. No, it isn't. It's just that these people, their approval matters to me if I have a platform that I want to keep. And if you restrict me from saying things on a platform that you own that I benefit from, then I get offended. And it's like, I'm not getting offended at Twitter if they block, if Twitter shuts down. I'm not going to get offended at YouTube. I'm not getting offended because you can't shut me up from what I got to say. If you come in my church and try to force us to do that, then I'm just going to face the consequences for it. But as Peter and John said, this is the name. I'm not going to stop saying what I got to say in order to honor the Lord. But I'm also not going to allow myself to be pulled into this fake war where I'm more concerned about constitutional morality than biblical morality. So I'm all offended and yelling at people and accusing people of stuff. And there's nothing about that honors the Lord at all. The question that everyone should be asking is not, is this hindering my free speech? The question that we should be asking is, what fruit of the Spirit is my response? That's the question that makes me be like, ooh, Lord, I'm a wild dude and I need a lot of grace, and he gives it. But what do I know? I'm an ex-street dude who can hardly read. Thanks for watching. Kirk Kennedy signing off, y'all. Grace and peace.